Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Atkinson. I'm president of ITIF. I want to welcome you to an event this afternoon on measuring internet piracy on broadband networks. So I think it should be a really fascinating and interesting event, and we will adjourn precisely at 1:30 and should have some time for discussion and questions as well. So what I'll do is I'll introduce our panelists. I'm going to make just a couple of minutes remark. We'll have David Price make the major comments on the study that David just released, and then we'll have Klaus, Thomas, and Daniel make some comments about that study. We start by in the middle here. David Price is head of Piracy Intelligence at Envisional. Envisional is an internet consulting firm that provides analysis and research to content owners on digital piracy. David is a recognized authority on digital piracy, from original pirated sources to public propagation through BitTorrent, other peer-to-peer networks, and web-based piracy locations. The analysis provided by his Piracy Intelligence team is valued by content owners and content producers, allowing them to better understand the piracy landscape as it affects valuable content. So we had heard about David's study. It's not an ITIF study, but we had heard about the study and thought it was an interesting set of findings, and certainly worth presenting and getting those findings out in Washington, which is why we're hosting this event today. Next will be Klaus Mochowski, who is Klaus, joining us on from Germany on Skype. And if the connection doesn't work very well, it will be the fault of thousands of people downloading HD movies on the network as we're trying to have a phone call with Klaus. He is the CEO and co-founder of ITIF, which is, and he conducts research in the area of network management for over 5 years, working on international projects in the San Diego Supercomputer Center, the University of Leipzig in Germany, and the University of Waikato in New Zealand. And prior to that research, he served as an IT consultant planning and deploying large-scale network installations. He's also a net neutrality and deep packet inspection expert and speaks regularly at conferences. Next will be Thomas Sehested.
Very good.
Okay. Senior Vice President. This is the international panel for ITIF. Thomas is the Senior Vice President for Anti-Piracy Solutions at Mark Monitor. Mark Monitor is a market leader in brand protection headquartered in San Francisco. He's been with Mark Monitor for more than 7 years, focused on internet anti-piracy. There he is responsible for the company's anti-piracy solutions business. In 2004, Thomas founded DTechNet to effectively combat the growing problem of internet piracy worldwide, and also worked in business development in one of Europe's largest internet service providers, Tiscali, and has had management positions with the Danish anti-piracy group. So a really great panel. And last, we've got in cleanup is Daniel Castro. Daniel is senior analyst at ITIF, focuses on internet policy issues, and was the co-author of a report we released last December, a year ago, December 2009, called Steal These Policies, which was a guide to anybody who's under 50 won't get that reference, but you already know this reference to Abby Hoffman's Steal book. And it was, I think, one of the most comprehensive pieces, really looking at the problem of digital piracy around the world and what are some of the solutions, both technical and policy, that you could bring to bear to solve the problem, or address the problem, I should say. Just make 2 quick points. One is piracy is a big problem, irregardless of whether it has an effect on the network or not. It's a big problem in the sense that the U.S. is the world leader in content production, and we're trying to be competitive globally in a wide variety of industries, the high levels of piracy all around the world, essentially hurt the U.S. content industry and directly result in loss of jobs and loss of income to the U.S. economy. But the fact that so much piracy is conducted, so much of internet traffic now is pirated traffic, and probably most of that traffic would not occur had the users had to pay for content. Certainly some people will steal a movie, and if they couldn't steal it, they may buy it. But a lot of people won't just engage in stealing because the price is right. And because of the significant content going over these networks, I think that's another reason for policymakers to pay close attention to this issue. That it's not just an issue that's affecting the content industry and all the jobs related to that industry. It's an issue that's really affecting every internet user in the U.S. Because there's so much traffic on these networks. Networks have to scale up to be bigger. That costs us more money as broadband users, and it costs the overall economy. So with that, we'll start with David and present the findings from his study, and then we'll go from there. David?
Thank you, Rob, and my thanks to the ITIF for hosting this event. I hope it's going to be the start of what promises to be a really worthwhile debate on the way in which the internet is used. We started this report, it was commissioned by NBC Universal. It arose out of discussions we had with some interested and curious people at NBCU who were wondering about the use of the internet, wondering about how it's used. We read a lot and we hear a lot about how it's dominated by piracy, about how Netflix is affecting all of our streaming content, how Skype is following things up. But what we really wanted to know is precisely what was happening and how we could best determine how the internet is being used. But we were also very eager to get to know about the precise levels of infringement within that. We know that BitTorrent is a heavy user of the internet, but exactly what proportion of BitTorrent is being used for infringing content? How much of that content is copyrighted and shouldn't be there? We hear a lot about cyberlock is being used these days, places like rapid share and network upload. Again, how much of the content there is copyrighted, and how much of the total bandwidth that we're seeing on the internet is being used by these services? So our overall aims were to determine how much bandwidth, how things are being used on the internet, what's using bandwidth, and precisely what level of infringement those areas using. It's a very quick summary. I'm going to go through this at a relatively quick pace. You've hopefully got the summary here. There is a link to the full report, just there. I encourage you all to download and read that. The methodologies we've used are somewhat complex in places. I won't have time to describe all of those in detail today. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. If you do have questions about methodologies, there will be a question and answer session at the end, but a lot of it is covered in the report, and please feel free to email me or get in touch with me. I think that's our last text-heavy slide. Everything else is simply picture-heavy. So we started with a fairly blank slate. We started with a contention that nobody can disagree with, which is that 100% of global internet bandwidth is used by the internet. So it's a good place to start, and to give ourselves a tick for that one. What we wanted to do is then split that out. We wanted to work out how this was being used. So we looked at a range of monitoring studies which could tell us a bit more about what's in the internet pie. Most of these studies were released at the end of 2009, so we were starting to think about this project, and they were one of the spurs which led us on. We looked at studies from Sandvine, from Cisco, from other networks, and from Epoch. We also looked at other academic papers and research studies. There were problems. All of these monitoring vendors use slightly different categorizations. They all look at different levels of data. They're all based in different parts of the world. They have different numbers of monitoring locations. Arbor looked at something like 110 different monitoring locations around the world. Sandvine and Cisco were looking at about 20 or 30 in different places, all monitoring slightly different amounts of data, all categorizing things in slightly different ways. So there was a challenge there in terms of how to reconcile this. If you read the report, you'll see a little bit more about how we did that. But just to give you a brief, sorry, not too far there, just to give you a brief summary. This is our estimate of global bandwidth use. Nothing to do with infringement yet. You can see the web still dominates. The web, I'm talking about things like Facebook, like Google, like Flickr, like going to a news site and reading some articles. Everything you do on the day-to-day web, booking travel, is covered in that section. Above that, you have video streaming, which is the fastest growing area of the web at the moment, fastest growing area of the internet in terms of overall bandwidth usage. Spurred on by YouTube, spurred on by live video. I was watching Riots in Egypt on Friday from Al Jazeera. Incredible technology, incredible opportunities to consume content in this way. But growing extremely quickly, at least a quarter of all internet bandwidth, probably more, slightly more in the US, we believe. Below that, you start to have the arenas of the internet, which are often used for pirating purposes. About 17.9% of all internet bandwidth. Cyber lockers, again, rapid share, mega upload, for shared, around 7%. Then you start to get into the peer-to-peer arena and other areas using smaller amounts of bandwidth, Nutella, eDonkey, Usenet, gaming content, things like Xbox Live, voice over IP, VPN usage, and so on. So what we wanted to do was work out which bits of that were actually infringing. So I'm going to start with BitTorrent, and I'll spend quite a bit of time discussing BitTorrent. One, to give you an idea about our methodology, and two, because it's the biggest section of the internet in terms of infringing usage. So what we wanted to do is, we knew we had 17.89% of the internet bandwidth which is being used by BitTorrent. What section of that pie is being used by infringing content? So here's what we did. We looked at a place called Public BitTorrent, or Public BT. This is the largest BitTorrent tracker in the world. What Public BT does is manage BitTorrent downloads. It sits in the middle of BitTorrent swarms, doesn't host any content whatsoever. It just keeps a record of who's downloading what on BitTorrent. So if I'm interested in downloading a copy of Toy Story 3, I will find a torrent on a particular site, Pirate Bay. I will put it into my BitTorrent client, and that client will go off and talk to Public BitTorrent. It will say, who else has got this content of Toy Story 3? Who do I need to talk to start downloading it? Public BT will send me the IP addresses it knows, which are holding that file, other users on BitTorrent, and I will start downloading from that. And as I start downloading, I can start uploading to other people. On the day we monitored it, 12th of December, at a single point in time, there was about 2.72 million individual torrent swarms being hosted being managed by Public BitTorrent. An enormous amount of content. 19.5 million individual peers. It's not 19.5 million individual users. It's slightly less than that. We don't know how many less, but it's slightly less. Probably around 8 or 9 million. And we looked specifically at the top 10,000 torrents sorted by the people who are downloading it. They're often called leechers on BitTorrent. So we took the top 10,000 torrents, the most popular content at that point in time. They represented just under a third of a percent, just over a third of a percent of all torrents, but about 35% of all peers. So there's a very compact amount of users downloading a very small amount of content. We also found an enormous long tail of content, which wasn't particularly popular. So out of all those 2.72 million torrents, go on to the next slide, you can see that the vast majority of those torrents actually have very little downloading. You've got 45%, that big purple pie, who don't have any active downloads at any time. There might be people connected to that torrent who hold the entire file, but there's no one actually downloading it. There's no one pulling content from them at that particular moment. You have another 52% who have less than 10 downloads. And only 6,468 torrents, 0.2%, have more than 100 active downloaders. So there's a massive long tail of content on BitTorrent where the content is available if you want it, but there's not much interest in it. Which is why we focused on the top 10,000. So this is the breakdown by content type of those top 10,000 torrents. An enormous amount of pornography, that big blue slice up there in the corner. A note here, a slight digression about pornography. The main aim of this study was to work out how much infringing content there is, how much copyrighted content is being shared illegitimately online. a very large amount of that pornography is probably copyrighted and probably being shared illegitimately. It's a bit of a murky area, to coin a phrase, in working out what parts of that pornography is copyrighted or not. It wasn't something we wanted to involve ourselves in, well, at least not on work time. So we basically put that to one side. So whenever I'm talking about infringing content over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm talking about infringing content that is not pornography. Traditional copyrights, if you like, things like films, television, software, PC games, and so on. So, putting pornography to one side, films, 35% of that top 10,000 torrents were film content, followed by another 12-13% television. If you look at all the video content there, and that actually includes the pornography this time, so including films, television, pornography, anime, Japanese television, sports broadcasts, you've actually got 85% of that whole top 10,000, which is video-based. There's a very, very strong concentration on BitTorrent, on video programming, particularly films, and particularly television. These are the seeds and downloaders, or seeds and niches. You can see the films. If you go back here a moment, you can see pornography and films are actually relatively similar sizes in terms of the numbers of individual files. You go here, you can see that films absolutely dominate in terms of the number of individual users downloading or uploading content available. After that, television, music, software, and so on. But you can see, it's the video content, particularly films and television, in terms of copyrighted content which people are really wanting to download. This is the word cloud. Just to give you a very brief idea about what's going on. We took the titles of all of those top 10,000 torrents, ran them through an application which enabled us to take each word, the more often a particular word appeared, the bigger it is on the chart. You can see it's dominated by video terms, again, DVD, the pirated version of a full DVD. XVids, Blu-ray, HDTV, Blu-ray RIP, 1080p, 720p, DVD, PAL, DVD screener. It's all video content. You can pick out, if you're careful, you can probably pick out the individual words for Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows there somewhere. Megamind is there, Unstoppable, particular video terms. If you're wondering what those odd characters are, this is again related to pornography, unfortunately. A vast majority of the pornography we were finding on BitTorrent was Asian. It was Chinese or Japanese in pornography. I can discuss this in more detail later if you're really interested. But the application we used didn't cope with Chinese and Japanese characters very well. So that strange CS marker above XV is probably Chinese or, well, who knows what it is. I'm not going to go into that. So, the big question out of all of that is how much copyrighted material we actually found. So, putting the pornography again to one side, we identified 6,369 other torrents, apart from porn, in that top 10,000. One of those was not copyrighted. So, out of all of the identified torrents, which weren't pornography, 99.24% or something like that, was infringing copyright. There was one file in that top 10,000 which wasn't infringing copyright. It's a list of IP addresses for people who appear Guardian block list for avoiding spam things. So, massive amounts of possible infringement on BitTorrent. If we were to extrapolate that, that's 63.68% out from the top 10,000 to all of BitTorrent content, you can see that there's a huge amount of individual files being traded on BitTorrent which are infringing copyright. We did some checking further down the long tail. We looked at 500 torrents in batches of 100 from different points of that long tail of unpopular content. And again, we weren't finding anything which wasn't infringing. So just to go back to where we started, on BitTorrent exists, there's a 17.89% of the internet bandwidth, which is BitTorrent. 63.68% of that is infringing traditional copyrights and not pornography. We take 63.68% or 17.89%, we end up with 11.39% of total internet bandwidth, which is BitTorrent and infringing, and not pornography. Have I lost anyone in all of those percentages? So, just to illustrate that graphically, everything else, 82.11%, BitTorrent infringing, 11.39% of all internet usage, and non-infringing BitTorrent, all pornography, mostly pornography, 6.5%. Okay, I'm not going to go into as much detail of the earlier areas of the examples studied for you, and two, because I don't have that much time. Again, please read the full report because it's all in there. We do trust the methodology. We know there are probably holes in it somewhere. We know we cannot be perfect in producing an accurate picture of what goes on the internet, but we're confident we've got something here which is worthwhile your attention. So, cyberlockers. This is an area which is of major concern to content owners at the moment. We don't think it's overall as big a problem as BitTorrent, but you can see these are some of the most popular cyberlockers as of November 2010. 4Share, Mega Upload, Rapid Share, Hotfile, and others. This is Comscore's data, who we rely on. They do very good work providing an idea of unique visitors to particular sites worldwide. Simply to show you, apart from Rapid Share, who have been declining over the last year, all of these are increasing significantly in traffic over during 2010. So, cyberlockers, large central web hosted content. You upload a file, it sits there, you're given a link, you can share that link with anyone you want. They cannot be searched. You can't get a Rapid Share and ask it to tell you all the links that match Inception or Despicable Me or something similar. We used our discovery engine technology. I'm not going to get into how that works, but it's internet monitoring technology to crawl for links to major cyberlockers. We then chose 2,000 of those links randomly to see what they were, and we analysed the type of content that was being held by the cyberlocker. So here's the results. Overall, 73.2% of that content was copyrighted, and bits that weren't were probably, again, pornography, which was getting in the way in terms of us not identifying the pornography. So of 2,000 links, we identified 1,463 of them that were copyrighted. Video streaming. Fastest growing segment of internet bandwidth by almost every monitoring company. It's at least 25% of all bandwidth and growing. Most of the usage, though, seems to be fairly benign. It's amateur YouTube videos, it's news broadcasts like streaming from Al Jazeera of riots in Egypt. It's content which is either legitimate or user-generated. But it's not difficult to find piracy content. I think that's Movie2K, which is a site which indexes pirated content online. I think that's true for it. Screen of that. You can go to Google and type something in, watch Toy Story online, and it's not difficult to find links there. So the content is there if you want it. The methodology for this, we compared the size of video link portal sites with BitTorrent portal sites. We made an adjustment for file size. It's complicated again, please read it. Basically, overall, we found that of all video streaming traffic, pirated material made up 5.34% of all video streaming. That's much lower proportion than we were finding with BitTorrent and cyberlockers and elsewhere, mainly because most of the use is non-copyrighted, is put online for a purpose, for a legitimate purpose. So, overall, use of video streaming as a percentage of all internet traffic, we're looking at about 1.4%, which is much lower than we were seeing with BitTorrent and cyberlockers. Other file sharing arenas, I will do this very quickly because I'm aware I don't have enormous amount of time. On eDonkey, we made searches for various different types of file. We compared the number of sources we were getting back. We ended up with a figure of 1.82% on eDonkey. Nutella, we ended up with a figure of 1.56%. We were analysing different searches being made by users for different types of content. On Usenet, we trawled through a vast amount of random messages to see what we could discover there. And 0.86% of all internet traffic appears to be infringing Usenet content. I'm fully aware I'm really rushing through this, so please ask questions afterwards. So, this is where we started, with our big blank slate of the pie. This is where we went next, estimating the global internet usage for different areas. We then started to pick out different levels of content. So with BitTorrent, we found out that 11.39% of BitTorrent was infringing content. 11.39% of all internet traffic was infringing BitTorrent content. So we ended up with this. This is our final pie chart for global internet traffic. 23.76% of global internet traffic in our eyes is infringing and non-pornographic. The largest portion of that is BitTorrent, 11.4% or thereabouts, followed by cyberlockers, video streaming, and other peer-to-peer arenas like eDonkey, Nutella, and file-sharing arenas like Usenet. So just under a quarter of all internet traffic, by our estimate here, is infringing copyright and shouldn't be out there. One last slide. We also looked at the United States to try and differentiate what's going on here and what else is going on globally. Slightly lower levels of infringing traffic, 17.53% in terms of overall infringements. Again, BitTorrent makes up the largest portion of that, followed by cyberlockers, slightly higher video streaming proportion of infringing traffic. So non-infringing traffic in the US, 82.47%. Infringing traffic, not pornographic, in the US, about 17.5% of everything that's flowing through the internet. Stick your finger in the middle of the US somewhere, and you should find that 17.5% of everything that flows through that finger is infringing, shouldn't be. Those are the links. They're on this sheet, the summary sheets. They're on here. If you want to download them, please do. If you have any questions on contact details on the report, please let me know. And hopefully we can be able to start a good discussion here about where we go from this point and how we can provide better data to give a better understanding of how the internet is used. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to Klaus, who will join us by Skype. Klaus, we won't be able to see your PowerPoint, but I think everybody should have picked one up here. We'll get you on screen here in just 1 second. Okay, good. We can see you.
Okay, hi. Can you also hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to present at this event. I'm very sorry that I cannot be there in person, but let's hope that Skype's gonna work for at least for the time of this presentation. If you look at the slides, the couple of slides I presented, basically what I want to give you is a brief update on the measurements we're running in our internet studies, which you also find in the report, and also a few numbers which are not in the report and which we usually want to see publicly. But before I start with this, just a few background information about about the company. So we are a company that focuses on defect inspection solutions for traffic management, bandwidth management in operator networks. And this is also how we get hold of our data. So we approach our customers and we ask them to anonymously supply us with usage data, statistics data, which are gathered by our DPI, traffic management systems. And then we put them all in a large database and apply some magic and generate the reports. And we have started this in 2006, and the latest report we published is the one which was also used for the study. And this one was from 2008-2009. So measurements were basically done in late 2008. And this also, well, this is important information to put the numbers into perspective. So maybe if we switch to the next slide, so second page. These are some preliminary numbers from our current measurement campaign, which I will discuss later on in a little bit more detail, because we're changing the type of measurements and how we're conducting the measurements. So what you see here are statistics taken from Germany, and the gray part is basically the measurements from 2008 in the 2008-2009 study, and the blue ones are current data from late 2010. So they are pretty current data. And they were taken, so the blue ones, and 25 measurement points in Germany, representing about 750,000 users or households. So this is from operators in Germany who have mainly residential customers. And it represents about 1.2 petabytes, so 1,200 terabytes of traffic. So you could argue if this is representative, but it captures quite an amount of users. And as you can see, this is consistent with all the other studies. We are observing a decline in the percentage of peer-to-peer traffic from 50% in 2008 to 35% in 2010. And at the same time, we see an increase in web traffic, and we also see a substantial increase from 7 to 14% to streaming. So these online streaming sites we already heard about. So I think here we are pretty consistent with some of the other studies. We still see a higher number of peer-to-peer traffic than in some of the other reports, but this could be a bit biased based on our on the focus of our products early on. So from the beginning on, we started focusing, when we started the company, we focused on managing peer-to-peer traffic. So we had many university customers who were using the appliances to curb peer-to-peer usage. Of course, from then we have added support for all the other protocols. Now the systems are also used for quality of service assurance, but still we're pretty strong in peer-to-peer management, and this is why a customer who has issues with peer-to-peer is probably more likely to approach us, and probably will also have a higher peer-to-peer proportion as some other ISP may have in their network. So this is why there could be a slight bias compared to studies from Sandvine, for instance, Sandvine or ARA. And what you also have to keep in mind is that Sandvine has many tier 1 customers. We are more in the tier 2-3 arena, and also Sandvine is taking data from mobile operators, and in the mobile network you tend to not have so many large downloads because it's simply unfeasible to download stuff from peer-to-peer networks, for instance, from your handset. You usually do it at home from your computer. Okay, so much for the current data, and I'll also finish my talk with an update on our current measurement campaign. But let's switch to page number 3, and these are some data which are generated from our what we call peer-to-peer forensic system, which is a monitoring system which is crawling the peer-to-peer network, particularly ITIF and ITIF, for copyright infringements. So this is a service which we are running. So we are running the system in our lab, and we're cooperating with a German law firm who's basically getting the files from the content owners, and they are monitoring for copyright violations, and if we have identified an infringers, they send out cease and desist notes to the infringers. And this is a statistic taken from the 2009 to 2010. So on the x-axis, you see 2009, which is calendar week, so the 12th week of 2009. The next week is the 32nd week of 2009, and it ends in the 38th week of 2010. So it's not quite 2 years what you see here. And each line represents the monitoring campaign for a specific file. There are some German movies and some international ones, so you're probably not sure if you can read it on the printout. There's Eclipse, there's Iron Man, there's Resident Evil. And you can see the number of infringements we have monitored during this period of time. And of course, after the release date, there's always a peak, and the peak can be quite huge. And as you can see, if you take Orange Line, for instance, which is a German movie, we have monitored about 23,000 infringements per week. So the numbers are per week. And these are just the infringements we have monitored after applying some pre-filtering. And the pre-filtering usually reduces the number we've actually seen to 25%. So you have to multiply these numbers by 4, and this gives us the number of copies which we have actually encountered in the German internet. So this is quite substantial. And then you can see the decline as the movie becomes older and older. And what's also interesting is sometimes there are peaks later on. So there is a small peak, for instance, after only a few weeks in the orange line. And this is, for instance, if a better copy becomes available. And what's also interesting is the peak many weeks later for the red line. And this bump was basically triggered by the release of a DVD rip. So the initial spike was the movie being available shortly after release date, and then the DVD rip became available a couple of weeks later. So if we switch to the next slide.
Klaus, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
We don't, I think weren't able to print all the slides, so I don't think people now have the rest of your slides. They just had those. So you might want to just describe slides a little more.
Okay. So in this case, I'm going to skip the slide because it's basically the same numbers for music. And for those of you interested, you can download them from the website. I'm jumping to slide number 5 now, and this shows the average number of recorded infringements per file. And this is not for specific content, but this is averaged over the entire base of movies, music, and audiobooks, which we have monitored over the course of about 2 years. And for movies, we had a peak in late 2009, and we were on average recording about 700 infringement cases per week. And it declined a little bit in 2010. The figure went down to 300 to 350 average infringements per movie. And for music and audiobooks, it went down from peaks of 250 in late 2009 to about 80 in 2010. And now we are wondering where the decline comes from. So it's a decline of about 50%. And as we are monitoring only in peer-to-peer networks, of course, as people move away from pure peer-to-peer to get their free content, their legitimate content, they use things like streaming sites, Movie 2K or Kino TO, which is very popular in Germany here. And this is why we are seeing fewer infringements in peer-to-peer networks, but this coincides with the decline of peer-to-peer traffic overall. So it pretty much fits the picture. So much for the infringement system. And maybe to give you a better perspective on how these numbers were generated, the monitoring system works by running a modified peer-to-peer client, and it's a single system, and the system runs a couple of instances of a peer-to-peer client, in our cases BitTorrent and eDonkey clients, and we feed the system with a list of files which we want to monitor, and then it starts automatically crawling the BitTorrent and eDonkey networks for copies of these files, downloads these copies, and then does a couple of checks to make sure that the file we're seeing is really the file which we are monitoring. And then we are creating a profile of each infringer, and this profile is then sent to the law firm, which is then doing their legal stuff. So in the end, sending out cease and desist notes. And right now, the system is monitoring and generating about 40,000 infringement records per week, and this is after filtering. So before filtering, we see about 120,000 infringements per week. And after our pre-filtering process, it goes down to 40K. And this is only for a defined list of titles which we get from the content from the music and film industry. Okay, this is where these data come from. To conclude my presentation and discuss the final slide, for those of you who have it, this is a brief outlook of our next next version of the Internet study. So we haven't released an Internet study in 2010 simply because our effort to do these kind of studies is enormous. While we get the data from all the participants nearly automatically, it's a lot of manual work to put it all together and write up this report. And after having done this 3 times in a row, we were wondering what we could improve. And this is not officially available yet, but what will be available in a couple of weeks is a measurement statistics webpage, which we will host on our iTalk.com domain. And it will basically get live traffic statistics from all of our customers who agree to participate in this study. And it will, per geographic location, show the distribution of network traffic distributed based on the capabilities of our DPI classification engine. So it will, for instance, show streaming versus peer-to-peer versus web versus voice over IP traffic. And then you can click through and actually drill down and see, just look at the peer-to-peer stuff and see how much BitTorrent there is, how much eDunky there is. And the interesting part is that this is live data, and this is basically not processed by us. So this is the data as we get it from our customers. And this will be available all the time, and the idea here is that we kind of provide a permanent picture of how internet traffic is put together in different regions. And of course, it's again similar to our studies based on the data that our customers provide. So we are trying to get as much as possible, but it's again like a question like in all the other reports. If it's really representative depends on how many monitoring locations we'll get from different countries. Yeah, but all of this information will be available from a specific website soon. So this is the end of my brief presentation, and yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Klaus. I think what we'll do is we'll have the other 2 presenters, and then we'll have a discussion, and you can jump back in when we get to that point. So, Tom.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so just to give you a quick introduction to who I am, I'm Tom Sisters, president of the Anti-Piracy Monitor. I founded Detect and Software, a digital anti-piracy company about 6 years ago. And very recently, we're a Switchmark Monitor, a brand protection company. So we have now more than 400 employees in Europe and the US looking at content sharing, specifically copyrighted content sharing, where I have the focus on the digital side. I'm not going to be presenting any slides today, but I'm really kind of commenting on some of the trends that we've seen from the Envisional and the ITIF report. And some of you might also know that Mark Monitor put out a report not too long ago on the popularity of copyright infringing sites. So, and that would be basically everything from physical goods such as Nike shoes or Gucci bags to the actual digital content. I think that report actually complements very well what we've heard here today, both from Envisional and ITIF. I think our report focused solely on websites and showed that there was a staggering amount of infringements going on from these websites, or at least a staggering amount of traffic. I think, as Envisional pointed out in their study, a large part of that is actually infringing content. I think another very interesting trend that we've seen, especially with the ITIF data, is that the P2P piracy, at least in some areas, is declining compared to the web traffic. I think what we've seen through our studies is that web traffic driven by just basic consumption and how people use the internet now is a growing problem. I think everybody's aware of the sites such as Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and the amount of traffic these sites are generating. But in addition to generating a lot of traffic, they're also slowly changing consumer behavior. I think most of the people, and this is again more precisely, most people consume information now in a different way than they did years ago, and suddenly they're also starting to change the way they consume digital content and therefore also pirated content. So we're clearly seeing a trend towards the what we would call web traffic, so site blockers, video streaming, even the use of sites such as blogs, Twitter, to basically hear about content, consume content. Another thing I noticed in the article study was the sharp decline of P2P. I think that's very interesting. I think depending on what country, what area you look at it, in some areas I think it's stagnated, and in others it could have declined. I think Klaus mentioned was that a lot of their focus was on universities, which I actually think points out a very interesting trend. I mean, this is young consumers are quicker to adopt new technologies. So that might be why we're seeing such a sharp decline in P2P traffic, simply because these are younger consumers that are quick to jump on the new ways of distributing content. Whereas I think in general what we see with any kind of technology is there's a certain amount of stickiness with users. People are, I think, slower to adopt new technologies than I would probably have envisioned a couple of years ago. But I think when you look at universities, that's a very true kind of telling of what's probably is to come in the future in terms of how people consume digital content. I think kind of in looking at the different studies that have been presented here today, I think what certainly underlines depending on or regardless of how you look at this data, that this is a massive problem. I think when you go out and say a quarter of all internet traffic is pirated, and maybe it's a slightly larger number, maybe it's a slightly lower number, but regardless, this is a lot of content getting shared. And I think it demands a lot of attention on different levels, different countries. Yeah, so that was basically my answer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Daniel.
Thanks. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about why these reports matter. We heard from 3 different experts that have done separate research on this area, independently looked at facts, and I think there's a few striking findings. One, of course, something that everyone up there has said, this is a serious problem. 1 out of every 4 bits on the internet is infringing content. So when you have a problem of this scope, you really have to take the time to address it. But we also really learn a lot about understanding the details of how piracy works online now. First, contrary to some claims that we've seen in the past, illegitimate use of file sharing services is a serious problem. There's, when we look at BitTorrent, it's not over 99% infringing use. Second, we also get a better picture of the breakdown of the types of different file sharing services that are out there. P2P, the cyber blockers, and video streaming. I think that's really important that we finally are getting a grasp on understanding that, because that changes the types of solutions we need to look at to addressing this problem. There's also, I think, a number of findings that aren't really highlighted in the report. One, of course, is the economic impact of piracy online. And here we're still looking for more data. In 2005, there was a great study that came out that said the losses due to online piracy in the United States was around 22 billion. 20 billion to the content industries, music, movies, film, software, and games, and then about 2 billion to retailers. And so, of course, we know this has a very large impact on jobs. We also know this has, of course, a big impact on the revenue to the internet ecosystem. The money that goes into the ecosystem, the funds type of content that drives users online, wants them to invest in more broadband and more services. We also know this has an impact on the network. 1 in 4 bits is infringing content that's taking up a lot of valuable bandwidth that can be used for other purposes. We also know that the nature of online piracy has really changed, right? It's so easy to go online and find something. This morning I did a search for watch Inception online. The first, actually, the entire first 10 hits on tier search engines, I won't name them, but all of those were infringing content. And you have a service like Amazon on demand where you can download legitimate streaming. You can watch this movie. I verified it is up there. And you don't even find a link for that. So it's really not a surprise that users aren't going to the legal services. You also have sites, you've probably seen some of these music sites like Legal Sounds or Music MP3 that put a kind of veneer of legitimacy. There are these Russian MP3 sites. If you go to the site, you have no idea that it's an infringing site. It's called Legal Sounds, right? You go and you actually are paying for the music. So people don't realize what's always happening online when they're going to these sites. And this kind of underscores the fact that online piracy is no longer just about a bunch of college students trading films and music online. It's really turned into a big business. There was a Spanish study that just came out. There was a study by a number of academic researchers. Most of them were at the university in Spain. There was, I think, one at the University of Minnesota. And it was looking at who were the publishers on BitTorrent. And they looked, and they found there was really a small group. There were about 100 publishers who were responsible for 67% of the content, or 75% of the downloads. And a large chunk of this were actually for-profit publishers. So they were able to identify that these were publishers that were trying to make a profit. They were actively advertising the sites where you could go and download this, that they were had ads on networks, and that they were spending a lot of time and investing in a lot of resources to be able to do this. So, clearly when we look at these numbers, we can see that what we've done so far hasn't worked. That we need new tools to not only combat the large scale piracy, but also go after these new methods that are out there. So, about a year ago, as Rob mentioned, we felt this reports to these policies. We had a number of recommendations in there, and most of them fell into kind of three categories. One was cutting off the revenue for these for-profit publishers. That means going after the ad networks that are on here, being the financial transaction providers to stop doing these transactions. It means cutting off the audience to these sites because they get a lot of money, of course, from the number of viewers they have. So that's blocking sites so people can't get access to them. It's also about making it more difficult to upload content so easily to the sites. Right now, if you do a takedown notice, the content might pop back up again very quickly. And that happens in some sites, it doesn't happen on others. The ones it doesn't happen on as much are those that use content identification software. So it's going to take a lot of work collaboratively from government, from industry, from different partners in the ecosystem to really put together the pieces that are necessary to address this problem. So let me go ahead and end there and we're ready for some questions.
A couple of quick things. One, the video of this will be up on our website tomorrow. You can download it and then upload it on BitTorrent later. And then we'll go from 1% to 2% of all BitTorrent traffic, because the traffic on this event is going to be humongous, I'm convinced. One thing I remember a few years ago when Napster came out and then peer-to-peer came out, and one of the arguments that people made was, look, these technologies fundamentally are, they might be used for some bad things, but they're also used for lots and lots of good things, and so we should support the technology. And while certainly we agree with that in theory, to me what's striking about it is it's pretty clear that BitTorrent is not really used for anything other than piracy. I mean, it's like, we really want to defend 1% or 99%. So I guess my question to anybody on the panel is, what do you see as the as sort of the costs of going? Are there costs that we aren't aware of going after this content, or is it pretty much a clear kind of win? Other than the cost that the people now have to pay, that's a cost to them, obviously, if people weren't paying before. But an aggressive enforcement strategy. Are there risks to that or not? That's one of the things you'll hear, and we hear that with the QUACA debate, which is that QUACA is going to, Daniel, remind me what it stands for. And copyright, yeah, that's a great title. So this is the Lady Hatch bill, which Daniel testified or supported at Save the Net. But efforts like that, people will say, oh, if you do that, you won't break the internet.
I think the major costs of going after BitTorrent are simply time and resources. We've seen the entertainment industry try and take down Pirate Bay multiple times. It's still there. It's still the most popular torrent portal. It still has 30 million unique users every month. We've seen them try to take down things like Public BitTorrent and BitTorrent, the large trackers. They're still there. It's very difficult to work to take these sites down when there are legal jurisdictions where they're able to operate without any trouble. And I think that's the issue which you have to face. It's not that you can feel that these technologies are used for nothing but evil or nothing but copyright infringement, but if they're able to exist in a country which you cannot shut down, you've got an enormous battle on your hands. So I think you have the issues like site blocking, which may work. I think they may work to frustrate people, some people, but there always going to be other areas where they can get if they're determined. I think it's an issue of doing more to try and either educate at a governmental level or an intergovernmental level to try and say, well, here we have a technology which is not being used for almost anything but illegitimate content, and what can we do at this level? But it's a long, slow process, and you've really got to fight in many different areas to try and shut things down. I don't think it's simply a matter of saying, this is obvious to us, that this sort of thing is copyrighted, because the content owners have been doing that for many years, and we haven't seen a solution yet.
Just one other question to anybody on the panel, which picks up, David, on what you said, which is, have any of you done a study or are aware of a study that identifies countries as the problem, as opposed to individuals just going on BitTorrent and being a downloader or an uploader, but countries who are actually hosting these systems? I know Daniel, you talked about Legal Sounds, which is in Russia. There's a site in Canada that we identified. If you go to this site, you actually have ads from Amazon and there are all these great ads on the site. It's a totally 100% illegal site that the Canadian government lets operate out of Vancouver, and people advertise on it. Is there anybody who studies sort of what's sort of the country, which countries are the worst on a sort of per GDP basis, if you will?
I mean, we've looked at the problem from a couple of different angles. One is, what countries. It's not on it, but. We looked at the problem from a couple of different areas. One is, in what countries are there the largest percentage of infringers, and then, of course, also as you talk about, there are certain countries that, intentionally or unintentionally, kind of, safeguard some of these pirates. I think it more comes down to, this is, as everybody's very well aware, it's a very, very hot topic. And I think, occasionally you have case law in certain countries, regardless of whether they are aware of it or not, that kind of, for a period of time almost, act as a safeguard for piracy in that country. I think Canada's a great example of that, without hopefully offending too many Canadians. But, that's certainly a problem. I think, there's of course always these kind of, smaller countries here and there that that are harvesting these things, but essentially I think they're lesser extent the problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on. It wasn't directly part of your question, but another question there is, what country is the largest victim of online piracy? We get into that in the United States, and so we talk about whether they're doing, they're not doing things to help the United States. We talk about who loses from online piracy across the board in the United States.
Yeah, which I think is really one reason why some countries turn a blind eye to this, and why ultimately this has got to be a trade strategy and a USTO and a WIPO strategy, which in our view has been underutilized up until now. Because the fact that our next door neighbor, I was born in Canada, so I can say anything I want about Canadians. The fact that our next door neighbor is a haven for some of this, and yet has a strategy to be a world digital leader, which I commend them for, but they, at least until recently, were one of the largest spamming countries in the world, and certainly are a copyright violator. The fact that they haven't even gone after this, and they're a law-abiding set of people up there. The Canadians are probably a lot more law-abiding than Americans are when you come right down to it. The fact that they haven't even gone after this suggests how hard this can be. When you know, a country like Russia, how could we expect the Canadians will even do it? So let me turn it over, open now to comments or questions from the audience. If you can raise your hand and then identify who you are, and if you have a question for a specific person, say that. So right here in the corner, sir.
Yeah, hi, my name is Hummer. I have a question for the panel, and anyone can answer. Throughout the discussions, you know, there is not a significant book piracy. You know, there's a lot of talk about movie piracy, music piracy, but not literature piracy or book copyrighted print works. And I want to know what's different about piracy books that's keeping it minimal. Like, what is there something the book industry is doing, or is there just a different behavior with copywriters? Like, what's different about books and movies?
I think the answer is that most pirates are illiterate. But there may be another answer that I'm not aware of.
I think book piracy is a very interesting part of the internet. It does exist. It is out there. If you want a pirated version of the last Harry Potter book, it's there. If you want any other Harry Potter book in any other language, it's out there. There are a number of issues. Firstly, and this is something which has been solved recently, there was never a really good way of consuming a pirated book. You could read it on your laptop, but most people didn't like to do that. Or you could print it out and have a huge sheet of paper that you can carry around with you. You know, the book is one of those perfect content consumption mechanisms. It's wonderful, a little paperback book in your pocket. That's now been solved somewhat. Things like the iPad, things like the iPods, things like the Kindle. These are great tools for consuming book content. And we are starting to see a rise in book piracy because of that. But I think there's one big issue, which is that the difficulty of producing a pirated book, or at least there was a difficulty in doing it until lots of digital books came along. If you wanted a pirated book, you have to scan it in page by page and run it through some OCR software. So there was certainly book piracy out there. It tended to be reserved for very dedicated pirates who were that in love with a particular book that they'd sit there and scan it through and then read through it and proofread it. I remember, just to give you a small anecdote, I remember sitting in an IRC chat room when I think the fourth Harry Potter book was released, and there was a race on between individuals who bought the book at midnight when it was first released, and they were scanning it, and they were all distributed different chapters amongst themselves. So you do chapters 8, 9, and 10, I'll do 11, 12, and 13, and we'll see who's finished first. And they'd scan it through and they'd proofread it and they'd see who was there. And they were competing against a group in other chat rooms, all for the status of being able to put the first pirated version of Harry Potter out. You know, but it takes that sort of commitment. Unless you have a book like that, which is in massive demand, you don't necessarily see the pirated version of it. But I would say this is something which is starting to become a big concern for the content industry. Now there is a nice, easy way of consuming pirated book content.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, you know, also through our scanning, we've certainly seen an increase in digital consumption of book, of pirated digital consumption of book. I think, you know, probably why this is getting less attention is that if you look at legitimate sales of books, there's still the digital part of books is still a very, very small subset of the actual consumption of, you know, books. Whereas if we look at the piracy problem, that's actually very fast increasing because of, you know, very nice platforms such as, you know, the Amazon Kindle, the iPad, iPods, all of that, like an easy way to consume it. So it's certainly something where we've seen a very sharp increase. But as David just pointed out, I mean, it is also a question of demand. And, you know, if there's no demand for the product, whether it's a movie or a book, there's a lot less of a chance of it getting pirated.
Right here, and then here.
Tom Sidner, Innovators Network. Question for David. Congratulations on your study. I just have I understand perfectly well why you handle the pornography the way you do it in this study by separating it out. I understand exactly why you would do that, but it strikes me that it's almost that content is also likely to be overwhelmingly infringing. Are you aware of any study? There may well not be one, that has looked at, how pornography is pirated and some sort of general percentage of what percentage of porn is adult content is pirated?
I would imagine it's a very large percentage. When we were looking through this to identify what particular file names were, you saw the file name, we'd look through to see what it was, you see screenshots of DVD covers and so on. So you get a fair idea that most of what you're looking at is probably pirated. We know the adult industry has recently started taking very big steps in terms of trying to challenge content online. They've shut down a couple of BitTorrent trackers. They pursue what they call the tube sites, things like YouTube for porn, very aggressively to try and pursue their copyrights there. But we also know that some adult studios put content out as a promotional material, as marketing material, to try and draw people into their particular sites or their particular legitimate distribution of content. So we don't know. I would guess that it's fairly high. A guesstimate of probably 75–80% is probably copyrighted and infringing.
If that were to be the case, and I won't hold you to this, what would that bump up the overall number from 24% to approximately? 35, 40. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. It would probably be at least 30%, if not more. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Derek Collins, from Scott Brown's office. My question was for Dr. Price regarding his report here. You said that you focused on the public BT tracker, and to me that seemed like kind of peculiar data to extrapolate. Did you include any other data? And the reason that I say it's peculiar is because you only really need a tracker for illegitimate content. If you're going to download the new version of Internet Explorer 9.0 from Microsoft, and they want to offer that legitimately, then they don't need to put that on public PT. They want to offer a torrent. So it seems like you're getting a disproportionate percentage of torrent traffic that is illegitimate. And we've seen that a number of content producers in the gaming industry have tried to offer legitimate torrents. My point is that when you have one legitimate file, that seems to be like far too low, even though I would recognize that the percentage of illegitimate traffic is probably well above 90%.
Yeah.
Did you include any other trackers or technology?
Yes, it's a good question. We focused exclusively on public PT. We did look around to see what sort of usage was being made of BitTorrent legitimately. We know World of Warcraft use it for distributing, we know Blizzard use it for distributing World of Warcraft updates. We talked to them and we got, they didn't give us much information. But when they push things out over BitTorrent, they do it every now and again, and it's only a small portion of their user base which actually use BitTorrent in that way. So we're not seeing massive downloads for that. We looked, for instance, at Linux distributions. Red Hat used torrents to distribute their Linux ISOs. Again, not huge downloads. It's very, they don't issue updates that often, and when they do, the number of people actually downloading through BitTorrent isn't massive. We did a study of Open BitTorrent, which is quite similar to public BT, about a year before we did this most recent study, and we found very, very similar data. Only, again, in the top 10,000, we only found a single file there, and that was actually a Linux distribution. But I do take the point, and I think there is a small proportion of BitTorrent usage which is legitimate, which is used by people like Linux distributors. But in terms of the number of people who want to download the latest version of Red Hat is a tiny proportion compared to the number of people who want to download last night's episode of Dexter. And last night's episode of Dexter is on next week and the week after and the week after. So there's a lot more content flowing there, and a lot more frequently. So you're right, there is non-infringing use there, but I would imagine that it's actually, in terms of overall use of BitTorrent bandwidth, I would imagine it's a very, very small proportion.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think another argument slightly related that you also hear is that, well, I use file sharing, illegal file sharing, because I can't go and buy it in the store. There's no legal offering. I think when you look at what's being pirated out there, it is the Billboard Top 100. It is the most popular movies, and I think, you know, looking at the diagram where you said, well, you know, if we look at the 2,000 torrents that we took as a sample, it's a fraction of those that generate 90% of the traffic. You know, when a movie such as Avatar comes out, or Inception, you know, it's staggering numbers. And again, TV shows, you know, I think it's also a very big driver of piracy, mainly outside the U.S. because there's a lot of legal ways to consume here in the U.S. But again, when we look at piracy, you know, this is again, you know, if we're looking at these numbers over the past 6 years, you know, 90% of it, a very, very high percent of what's being pirated out there is the top most popular content as consumed in, you know, theaters or, you know, the Billboard Top 100.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a follow-up to that. When you look at the overall graph of the internet, you had whatever 20% that was Bitcoin overall. Did that include DHT magnetic ring technology that's involved tracker, and how did that play into your study?
Yeah,
I want to explain what that is.
Sure. Usually, most downloads through the torrent use a tracker. So you get your file, you talk to the tracker, and the tracker gives you IP addresses of the people who are involved in that particular download. There's also a piece of technology called DHT. It's a decentralized overlay on BitTorrent, which connects you to the other clients on the network. So at the same time that you're getting IP addresses from the tracker, you're also able to get some IP addresses that are stored, if you like, on the network itself. We did look at the DHT because what we were looking at primarily was usage of BitTorrent as a whole. So any transfers that are on BitTorrent, whether it's via the DHT or via other means, will use the BitTorrent protocol and will be picked up in terms of the proportion of BitTorrent, the proportion of internet usage of BitTorrent. In terms of looking at DHT for additional sources, additional numbers, we didn't crawl it explicitly, but certainly my understanding from looking at this over a long period of time is that the DHT is still very much used as an addition, as a supplement. You get your torrent, which connects you to the tracker, and at the same time you're talking to the DHT. So I think there's still a very small minority of users who just use the DHT exclusively. And even so, the tracker would usually be there somewhere for that particular swarm. So whatever swarm you can find on the DHT, you can usually find it on a tracker like public torrent.
Klaus, feel free to jump in at any time. Question I have is, I guess it was last year or the year before, I think it was last year, France passed a law, essentially a three strikes law for ISPs, and if you're found infringing illegal content the third time, you can be kicked off the network for, I believe it's a year. I'm not exactly sure, I think it's a year. The UK had done something similar, but they haven't really implemented it yet. Does any of the data allow one to look at a country like France and find if this law had any impact on illegal downloading? Klaus, you might have seen this in Germany as well.
I mean, there's nothing in our report that looks explicitly at France. From the evidence we've seen, it looks like there might be some movement in France from things like peer-to-peer and BitTorrent to usage like cyberlockers and video streaming, which doesn't fall in MP and wouldn't because of the way the law is structured. You can't find people's IP addresses if they're downloading from video streaming sites. From what we've seen, we did a little bit of studying before MP was implemented. There seemed to be a movement there anyway in France, as Thomas has identified and as we've identified, in terms of a movement away from peer-to-peer onto web-based mechanisms. So I think that was starting anyway. It may well be that MP has encouraged that along, move people onto networks where they can remain slightly more hidden.
Can you extend on that a little bit when you say they can remain hidden? Is because the cyberlockers aren't tracking their users, or?
It's because the way AMP is written is to do with peer-to-peer file sharing. So they have a monitoring company that is scanning things like BitTorrent and eDonkey, looking for users connected to torrents for copyrighted content or eDonkey downloads for copyrighted content. With cyberlockers and video streaming sites, the connections between you as the user and RapidShare or Mega Video. So there's no way of getting, for a scanning company, to get in the middle of that. The only way you'd be able to get the IP addresses to be connecting to that is either talking to the cyberlocker or the video streaming site, or somehow persuading the ISP to do the monitoring for you. And none of those people are going to be willing to indulge in that.
Over here.
I'm Matt Passman from the Department of State, and I'm just wondering whether there's been a study done that tries to get at who these commercial entities are behind some of the commercial content that's being placed on the BitTorrent network. Whether they're national entities or organized crime or something along those lines.
I think they're either people who are trying to distribute malware or viruses. They upload the content, they see that as an easy way to try and get illegitimate content from their point of view. The content they want, malware of some kind onto your computer. Or they're people that will be using that as a way to try and get you to pay for something. When you download a piece of video, it will tell you you need to install this particular player or this particular codec to be able to play this video, and you've got to pay $5 to get it. So I think it's mostly something which is done at a small individual or small organizational level.
Well, the Spanish study I mentioned looks a little bit like that. I mean, it categorizes the groups into three. There's the altruistic people, the home users. There's the malware users, and the anti-IRC groups that are uploading fake content onto the networks. And then there's the ones that are actually uploading paid content. And they look into that, but that study was analyzing the cost involved. And they were suggesting that it is substantial, and that these have to be substantial organizations to be able to afford to see large amounts of content very rapidly on these networks. So I think there's some more research.
But they didn't do like a profile of what kind
They
of
didn't
organizations they are.
profile who that is, but they did profile what are these networks.
Yeah, that seems like a next step in terms of figuring out where to go exactly. Who are the countries that are doing this, and what are the organizations that are really behind this? You had a question or comment?
First, from a methodological standpoint, how do you distinguish between infringing copyright, or this is a copyrighted material, and non-infringing, or licensed or fair use? And then just from a policy standpoint, it seems to me that there's two different policy aims that are being labeled here, because if you move everyone to being legitimate and getting actual legitimate licensed versions of all this material, will this really help the overload on the internet, which seems to be the second sort of policy aim that we're talking about?
To answer a methodological point, we went for the infringing versus non-infringing content. We looked at what that content was. If it's an episode of Dexter, if it's a version of Inception, it's obviously non-copyrighted. In the vast majority of cases, it was a simple decision. We knew that someone should not have been uploading Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows 6 days after it was in the cinema. Where we were unsure, we would do some research into what that title was and see if there was any sort of public domain version of it. There were a few books which we looked at, which sometimes people are releasing books online for free. We found that they haven't been released in that way for the books we looked at. So in most cases, it was a very simple decision for the 10,000 titles that we looked at.
Anyway, we want to address this second question, which is what is the sort of elasticity of demand here? If people had to pay, would they be doing the same amount of uploading and downloading? Or no uploading, actually, but downloading?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that's very often, asked in this space, and I think, there's no doubt, I think, in anybody's mind that it's probably not one-to-one. If everybody had to pay, they probably wouldn't, pirate as much. I mean, we see people with, sharing 150,000 audio tracks. If you put that on shuffle, it's going to last you quite a while. I think But at the same time, we've also conducted studies with some rights holders that suggest that actually there's a fairly large conversion rate, above 30 to 40%. Again, this is in certain areas. We also see that typically the pattern for downloading a movie is that a lot of people will download the camcorder. That means somebody has actually a handheld camera within the theater. It's usually very low quality. And then once a digital version comes out, they will then re-download. So already there you can subtract some of the traffic. So there's no doubt that if you were tomorrow to be able to convert everyone to a legit offering, traffic would go down overall. But I think it very much depends on what space you're looking at, whether it's games, it's business software, it's movies, it's music, in terms of what that conversion rate would be.
I think it really depends on the service you're offering to people. If you offer them an advertising supporting service like Hulu, massively popular, and people are going to use that. If they're looking to video, if they're streaming Dexter, I used Dexter. It was the most popular individual file on the day that we actually did the torrent monitoring. If people are streaming that illegitimately, and Showtime can come along and offer them a legitimate stream, which is guaranteed high quality and is going to stay there for as long as they need, and which they can access without any trouble, and all they've got to do is sit through a 30-second advert, people would be quite happy to do that. If you're making them pay $2 to do it, they're probably a lot less likely. We've seen it, for instance, in the UK with the iPlayer, hugely successful. We see it with things like Steam in the gaming arena. You pay for Steam, you get your content delivered automatically, but again, it's hugely popular. People love it because it gets their content to them easily, it's easy to use, it offers additional benefits that Piracy doesn't, and there's something to really attract them to what the offering is. So I think you need to think about carefully crafting what service you're offering. You've got to compete. It's not just a matter of battling and trying to shut people down and saying, well, my legitimate service is here, come and get it. You've got to persuade people to come to you. Because in their eyes, they are rational downloaders. They don't, most people don't see themselves as pirates. They see themselves as a huge fan of Dexter. And if you're in the UK and you're desperate to watch the latest episode of Dexter, you've got to wait a few months before it comes on the TV. You've got to pay for your Sky cable subscription to get it. Or you can download it online for free the day after it appears in the US. And to the people doing it, it's not I'm doing something wrong. It's I'm a huge fan of Dexter. I'm going to buy the box set when it comes out. I'm going to buy T-shirts. It's a matter of engaging with the content that they love. And I think if you look at it from that sort of mindset, there's a huge market out there of people who want your content and are probably prepared to reward you for it if you can market it to them in the right sort of way.
We have time for just one more. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Klaus. You gathered your data through DPI, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. I was just wondering whether any of your clients raised questions either about privacy concerns or whether the use of DPI to actually identify this copyrighted material slowed down their system at all, or whether there were concerns about latency.
Right. Okay. So there are two parts on this question, so let me take them separately. About pirate material, we didn't really identify pirated versus or illegal versus legal material at any point in time. So we're just identifying things like this is BitTorrent traffic, this is eTanki traffic, and for certain types of these kind of traffic types, we can even drill down to things like files. So for eTanki and BitTorrent, we can identify individual files which have been downloaded, and this is what we have done for the study. So the question is, if it slows down the equipment, no, it doesn't, because this is something which is running in the background. If such a system, a DPI-based system, has been deployed for bandwidth management in an operator's network all the time. So it doesn't have an adverse impact on performance. So now the privacy issue, this is the toughest question. Well, in the first place, may or may not have concerns about using this type of equipment, because of course we are all aware of this debate on DPI, if it's okay to use DPI for operator or not, and even if they decide to use it, most operators don't talk about it openly, so there is still some question about it. And then there's this question we had, if we approach them, if they allow us to use their data for our report. Of course, it's a matter of mutual trust that we anonymize the data, so that we don't use data on, say, IP addresses of this operator, which are in theory available, but which haven't been used or distributed at any given time. And so this is really a trust relationship, but it's a very delicate one, I agree.
Great. Well, it's we need to adjourn. I think we could continue this conversation. I want to first of all thank Klaus for joining us all the way from Germany, and it seemed like there weren't a lot of BitTorrent lines going on while we were doing this, so it seemed to work. And so please join me in thanking a great panel. And